Before we get started, a quick heads up. Presidents Unplugged now has merch. If you want to support the show and represent the podcast in your daily life, you can at presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. That is presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. If you were to picture one of the loudest decades in American history, the Roaring Twenties, where there was booming businesses, jazz music playing everywhere, all the rich people going to Great Gatsby-like parties, a time when America was changing faster than ever before, you probably would not picture one of the quietest men to ever sit in the Oval Office leading it all. This is the story of our 30th president, Calvin Coolidge, and how a man nicknamed Silent Cal ended up leading America through one of its loudest and most chaotic moments in American history. Let's do this. Calvin Coolidge was born on July 4th, 1872, in the tiny village of Plymouth Notch, Vermont. And if being born on Independence Day doesn't tell somebody that you're probably going to end up in American politics, I don't know what does. He grew up in a hardworking family with a father who seemed to do everything, from farming to running a store to serving in local government. But Coolidge's childhood was also marked by tragedy. His mother died when he was only 12 years old, and shortly afterward his younger sister passed away too. This tragedy and loneliness in his childhood helped shape his taciturn personality. Taciturn is our word of the day. Taciturn describes a person who's reserved or quiet. This doesn't sound like a president. He's valuing hard work, he's disciplined, but he's quiet. Don't presidents have to speak up and be bold? Well, Coolidge was going to have to learn these traits. He attended Amherst College in Massachusetts, and despite being this shy guy, Coolidge studied philosophy and public speaking, which feels a little ironic for this man known for barely talking. After studying law through an apprenticeship rather than law school, Coolidge moved close to where he went to school in Northampton, Massachusetts, where he built a reputation as an honest and dependable guy. And while some presidents immediately jump up to positions like the Senate or the House and give them a direct line to the presidency, Coolidge slowly worked his way up through local politics, not rushing his career. But eventually he became the governor of Massachusetts in 1919. Before politics fully took over his life, we have to talk about his wife, Grace Coolidge. The story goes that Calvin once heard a laugh coming from a classroom, and he had no idea who it was. Little did he know that that woman would become his future wife. Grace Goodhue taught deaf children how to communicate and read lips, and somehow one of America's quietest men ended up marrying one of its most outgoing women. The joke at the time was that if Grace could teach deaf children how to communicate, maybe she could teach Calvin Coolidge how to talk. They married in 1905, had 2 sons named John and Calvin Jr., and together, their opposite personalities balanced each other out perfectly. And now, this new governor of Massachusetts was a family man. In 1919, right when Calvin Coolidge became the governor of Massachusetts, he faced one of the biggest challenges of his political career during something called the Boston police strike. Police officers in Boston stopped working to protest wages and conditions. We're not happy, so we're going to stop working. But can you imagine what happens when police officers stop working? Yeah, the city goes into chaos. And even though these officers expected Calvin Coolidge to come on his knees saying, "Please, please, please come back, we need you in Boston," Coolidge did just the opposite. He fired all the striking workers, famously saying, "There is no right to strike against the public safety by anybody, anywhere, anytime." This decision was controversial, but it made Coolidge nationally famous as Americans saw him as this calm and firm leader during the uncertain times of World War I. Soon after, this popularity led him to be selected to serve as the vice president under Warren Harding in 1920. The Harding-Coolidge ticket ended up winning the election. But if you've ever listened to my episode, number 29, Why Am I Here?, you know how chaotic the Harding administration was. Warren Harding and all of his cronies got together and made some terrible decisions. Most famously, the Teapot Dome scandal and lots of parties involving illegal alcohol in the White House. But in all of this partying, literally a perfect image of the Roaring Twenties, they left one guy out. That Coolidge guy, he's no fun. I'm not going to invite him to my illegal parties. Illegal parties? Man, Harding, like, are we going to impeach this president or something? Oh, we didn't even have time. Because in 1923, Warren Harding unexpectedly died of a heart attack. And in one of the strangest presidential swearing-in stories ever, when Calvin Coolidge's own father woke him up in the middle of the night and said, "Hey, Warren Harding is dead. I need to swear you in as the president." Because Calvin Coolidge's father was a notary, he could do this. So in the middle of the night, Coolidge's father, under a kerosene lamp, swore Calvin Coolidge in as the 30th President of the United States. And in that position, all of a sudden, what does he even do? Does he rush to Washington? Does he panic? Does he celebrate? No. Our brand new 30th President goes right back to sleep. That is the most Calvin Coolidge thing I've ever heard in my life. Abraham Lincoln was 6'4". Franklin Roosevelt was the president for over 4,000 days. These are facts. But you know what else is a fact? The fact that Presidents Unplugged has an Instagram page. If you want presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at Presidents_Unplugged. That is Presidents_Unplugged. I'll see you there. After the scandals of the Harding administration, Coolidge brought stability. He focused on lower taxes, smaller government, and letting businesses operate with little government interference, which fit perfectly with the booming economy of the Roaring Twenties. Even during the action-filled decade with adjectives like booming and roaring, Coolidge was still known as Silent Cal. Because it didn't matter if he was the top man in the country, he still barely talked. Coolidge's idea was that If he didn't say something, it couldn't be used against him. Words that he never said could never be thrown back at him. There's even a story that, although widespread, has not been fully proven true, even though I really want this story to be true. So take this with a grain of salt. When a woman walked up to Calvin Coolidge and she bet that she could get him to say more than 2 words, Coolidge simply replied, "You lose." Calvin Coolidge, you legend! Somehow that one story, whether it's true or not, tells you everything you need to know about him. He was serious most of the time, but he also had a great sense of humor. And on top of that, he was also kind of quirky in the most entertaining way possible. As we learned earlier from him falling asleep after being sworn in, he loved to sleep. He would take naps all the time, even as president. He also had a pet raccoon named Rebecca that would wander around the White House. He would rub Vaseline on his head because he thought it had medicinal benefits. And when a White House employee told him that he shouldn't be riding his horse out in public, he used a system and created an electric horse to ride in the White House. What a guy. Okay, quirks aside, what did Coolidge do politically? Coolidge signed the Immigration Act of 1924, greatly restricting immigration. And while I'd love to sugarcoat this, after a time like Ellis Island, where we let millions of immigrants into our country, Calvin Coolidge's plan for this Immigration Act of 1924 was to limit who could come in based on race. Yikes. But also, he signed the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, which is a great win. It granted citizenship to Native Americans that had been denied citizenship for centuries in America. He generally avoided the dramatic political fights that were happening around the time, but behind the success of the Roaring Twenties came one of the most heartbreaking moments in Calvin Coolidge's life. In 1924, the same year that he would run his own presidential campaign, his son Calvin Jr. developed an infected blister after playing tennis at the White House. In a time before antibiotics, something so small could turn deadly, and tragically it did. Calvin Jr. died at just 16 years old. And many historians believe that Coolidge never emotionally recovered from this tragedy. Coolidge himself later said that when his son died, the power and glory of the presidency went with him. Despite the heartbreak, Coolidge ended up winning the 1924 election in his own right. And after winning in 1924, because Coolidge came in with a partial term with Harding, constitutionally, Coolidge could have run again in 1928. But he shocked Americans by simply saying, "I do not choose to run for president." That was it. No dramatic explanation, just classic Calvin Coolidge saying what needs to be said, and no more. He retired back to Massachusetts and died in 1933 at only 60 years old, shortly after seeing the nation enter the Great Depression. And historians, even today, still debate his legacy. Some praise him for his stability and economic success, while others argue that his hands-off style helped contribute to the problems that led into the Great Depression. But one thing about Coolidge is undeniable. He may not have been the flashiest president in American history. He might have stood out as a quiet figure that nobody could have expected. And during one of America's loudest times, Silent Cal left behind a legacy just loud enough for history to remember today. And that is why Calvin Coolidge is so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about James Monroe. Just because you're the president during the era of good feelings, does that make you a good president? Monroe crossed the Delaware with Washington. He was a founding father, he was a Secretary of State, and eventually the 5th President of the United States. His resume seems flawless. But does that make him a flawless president? Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. Thank you for listening to Presidents Unplugged. If you enjoy content like this, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, when do we release new content? Once a month, maybe twice a year, maybe even once a year? No. We release new content every Friday at 1 p.m. for my American enthusiasts to enjoy. Come join me on our dive into making American history the most entertaining and interesting subject to learn every single week. I'm Ty Svensson, this is Presidents Unplugged, and I'll see you soon.